Just to let you know that after the Deputy Minister has spoken and availed herself for some questions of clarifications or comments on her input, we will invite Mr. Choke to come up and do his short presentation. The IPED and other Civilian Secretariat inputs have pretty much been covered. Their papers are available, and they will be around to be asked questions of directly. So too the police, and the senior police is also here. If you have questions for them directly in the question time, please let's use that time for some robust discussion and also looking at the way going forward. Is that okay? Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, good morning again, Honourable Minister, Honourable Deputy Minister, guests. It's for me a privilege to introduce shortly the Deputy Minister, our next speaker. She hails from the Free State and has been involved in politics for a very long time. She's also currently a member of the PEC of the governing party in the Free State. But I think in terms of experience of the police, she's a real expert in this room. She's been previously 2 terms for 10 years the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Police. She served already 1 term as Deputy Minister of Police. She's now in a 2nd term. So it's more than 16, 17 years experience in this portfolio. So there's no person, I think, in this room with that collective knowledge, and she knows about all these institutions. She knows a lot about them each individually. So thank you very much, Deputy Minister, and we're looking forward to your contribution.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thanks to you, Program Director. I think my contribution is going to differ from that of the Minister, and it's also going to differ from that of the police, because I believe in the belief that says, if you are ill or if you are sick, you visit the doctor. The doctor don't just say that, clear, what is the problem. You will have to tell the doctor what is your problem, and the doctor will come with the right diagnosis. Hence, you saw in this program that I visited the Central Firearm Registry 10 days ago. In order for us to be able to be assisted by the experts in here, we need to tell the truth so that we can be assisted. It's a pity that I wasn't here when the department made their presentation, but I went through the presentation. I'm happy because I saw that the plans that they've decided upon, they are responding to the findings that I came across with when I visited the firearm. To Minister Nhleko, Minister of Police, Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, Members of Parliament, SAPS Management, and all our delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Chairperson, for inviting us to this important platform to discuss and deliberate on issues of the firearms. We all know that having a gun does not guarantee one's safety. And for once, I align myself with Gun-Free South Africa when they said, as far as back as 1999, that guns are not an effective deterrent. I'm sure you picked up from what the chair says about me being in this environment for quite a long time. I must say that in most of the amendments that had been made in this legislation, some of them I participated, and some of them I was presiding over them. In the same vein, having legislation on gun control will not prevent future armed robberies, murders, violence at schools, and massacres. However, having initiatives like this, that is like this summit, continues to give us hope as the leadership of the Department of Police. Seeing different progressive stakeholders here, pulling together to ensure that the Department of Police gets the best advice on how to formulate, amend, implement legislations on gun control is comforting to say the least. I listened when we were contributing, when the minister was here, giving some sort of advices on how to deal with some of the issues. One issue that I listened to is the issue of the microdots. Because you must remember that some few weeks ago or a month ago, the amendment on the legislation went to the cabinet, where then the cabinet raised their own concerns, and then we were given mandate to go back and come with more clarities on some of these issues. We went back for the second time to the cabinet, and issues of microdots. I must say that from myself as an individual, I raised the capacity within the South African Police Services to deal with this matter. As much as I know that there is a feeling that it is a necessity, but the challenge that we are faced with is the issue of capacity. The infrastructure to deal with this, do we have that kind of infrastructure to deal with it? Hence, I said to myself, when I heard that there is a summit like this one, said maybe here we will be assisted on how to take this proposal forward, because it is one of the clauses that has been amended in the Firearms Act. Therefore, I'm happy that we spoke about this in order for us then from here onwards, we know exactly what is it that we need to do. And also, I think the Portfolio Committee will be embarking on the public hearings, where then members of public and interested groups like yourselves will then come to the Portfolio Committee and assist the Portfolio Committee on how to deal with this matter. Because you know that even us as Cabinet, if we have passed a legislation or an amendment to legislation, but the last people who will come with the reality of that legislation is the Portfolio Committee. Because you will be summoning in people will come and tell you, this one is not implementable, we can't do this, and then we will decide whether you take it forward or you withdraw that just for the time being. I have looked at all topics that are covered in this two-day summit, and although all are extremely critical, one for me which is fundamental is the implementing of Firearms Control Act of 2002, which had been rightly allocated to the National Commissioner of Police. I would thus like to add two aspects of the implementation of the Act, which I regard as enablers for the effective implementation of this Act, as amended. The first enabler is the location of the Firearms Control Act and its implementation within multi-sectoral initiatives. We cannot accept campaigns on gun controls as a single issue campaign. Organizing around a single issue defies the objectives of government to make this country developmental for a better life for all. These campaigns must be embedded around all other key socio-economic issues faced by the majority of this country. Program Director, as apparent link does exist between social problems such as unemployment, poverty, inequality, weakened family bonds, lack of moral regeneration, and the attempt by people to escape these harsh realities into the world of violent crimes that include armed robbery, substance abuse and dealership, gangsterism, and murder. Therefore, I would plead with some of our learned delegates today to also look at the concept of social cohesion and moral regeneration to enable the Firearms Control Act to yield inclusive social justice system. For instance, the firearm-free zones should be revived and be emphasized upon, just like online smoking zones. That is the example at homes, schools, shebeens, and all public places, including the parks and resorts. The second enabler that I would like to emphasize on is the appropriate budget to implement this amendment legislation. The budget system is the single most important ingredient of public service delivery. Proper budgeting is the most important tool for translating government strategies, plans, and priorities into public service. I'm very sad to say today that with the billions that the South African Police Services gets every year from government since 1994. We are still faced with the same problem of a central firearm registry that is dysfunctional and in constant decay. As I have said when I started here, if we are sick, you need to be assistants, you must tell the truth. Because we have people here with different skills that we need them to come forward and assist us on how to deal with some of the challenges that I happen to see. One of the reasons why I'm saying that, I once presided over this committee, and most of the findings that I came across are findings that I came across as early as 2008. Therefore, there is something that has been done, but I'm sorry to say that most of the things are not up to the standard. There are further planned amendments to some of the sections of the Firearms Control Act, which have already been sent to Cabinet for consideration. And the Cabinet was understandably very concerned with the state of readiness of the Central Firearm Registry to effectively implement the proposed amendments of the Act, as I have said before I started. I was then forced to undertake an inspecting visit to the CFR on the 13th of March 2015. And what I saw, it is bluntly obvious that this CFR has not been a priority for a long time, General Stolle. Infrastructure is falling apart with its outdated IT system. There is a high vacancy rate. A lot of personnel were fired due to corruption, which was a good thing, but the problem is they were not replaced, most of them. And to the Central Firearm Registry, or the Appeals Board of the firearm is located in the same CFR building. And of course, there would be blaring of mandates and colliding, maybe let's say rubber stamping. The state of readiness is thus zero to implement some of the proposed parts of the legislation. I have made several recommendations after my visit to the CFR, some short-term and some long-term. The entire report of my visit is available. I need first to discuss it with the minister, after which then I will have to make it available to the police and the secretariat. However, I'm still waiting for the SAP to send me their own intervention report that will tell the Ministry of Police how the department is planning to address all this highlighted in my report. Although I saw in their SAP's presentation of this morning that most of the issues that they've alluded to are the direct response to my findings. And I'm really happy to, as I have said, to hear that some of our delegates do agree with us on issues of the microdots and some of the areas. These are some of the critical recommendations that I have made to the Department of Police after my inspection or my visit to the CFR. Researchers of Parliament must do a research and do benchmarking studies to find out if the CFR should be a division on its own. Because if it's a division, I think there will be a serious intervention. This will, in the long term, address issues of infrastructure, human capacity, and management. The Appeals Board needs to be moved to the offices of the Civilian Secretariat of Police to ensure impartiality of the body. Introduce short-term contracts and internship programs to address the acute backlog in all types of licensing. Just to explain why I'm coming from when I talk about the introduction of the internship. Only Gauteng alone, per day, they are receiving more than 10,000 applications. Gauteng alone, followed by the Western Cape, then KZN. And the kind of people that we have in that program or in that unit, most of the work are being done manually. Therefore, I propose to them that maybe it will be easier for us for just a short term of intervention, Minister, for maybe 24 months. Try to get help from outside in a way of internships, where we take these matriculants or be it tertiary students who are unemployed, and then train them on how to deal with that at that level, at the entry level. And then the staff that is trained on how to deal with this thing, you take 3 or 4 or 5 of them just to oversee that program. And then the others, you put them in an area which is critical. Because the 90 days that we have put ourselves to say that in order for you to get your firearm licensing and everything, it takes 90 days. It's not realistic under those conditions, unless you do something with regard to getting more human flesh to come and assist in that area. One of the areas is to maybe reconsider, because these things that I'm talking about, I sat with the actual people who are doing the work there. And then I asked them, what is it that we think that we can do in trying to assist you? So most of the issues that I'm trying to talk about are issues that I discussed with those clerks and junior police officers who are attached to the CFR. One area that came almost in each and every section that I visited, Minister, was maybe Parliament should reconsider the age limit of gun ownership from 21 years to 18 years. I know I was part of it when we decided, when we decided on 21 years. There were some people whom we gave platform and then tell us, why do you want us to raise it from 18 to 21 years? And they told us the reasons. But the people now who are implementing this, they said that it's not workable. Hence, we are bringing back to Parliament. Parliament should deal with that and assist us accordingly. And also one of the areas that was raised as also one of the things that we needed to deal with was the link between the crime administration system and the CFR system to immediately detect unfit people who apply for gun licenses. When you apply for a gun license or when you renew, the process is the same. There is nothing that says you renew, it's going to be quickly, because you don't know what happened with your life during the 5 years when you had that license. Therefore, you must go through the same route. But the problem is there is a stage when now they can't process your application because it needs to be sent somewhere in order for them then to wait for what is this lab now, crime something lab, when it need then to come back and tell them that no, this people is still okay, he or she can still possess his or her license. But that thing also takes long because there is no system from the firearms registry. Maybe when you just press a button and then it goes that way. No. You'll have to wait for some days before. Sometimes you wait for a month for that to come back to them in order for them to be able then to process your application. Hence, we are saying that we need maybe to change that system and make sure that we come up with an IT that make it easy for them when they just press the button, your ID, then it shows blah, 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 blah. No, this person is still okay, this person is not okay, then they can, but unfortunately, when it comes to that stage, they will have to wait for another month or 3 weeks in some instances. Then I was told that because Gauteng has got such a huge volume of application, there is a special arrangement that has been made between them and this other side that at least Gauteng don't keep them for more than 3 weeks. But it's unfair for other people from other provinces, especially my small province, the Free State, you see, yeah. And then I said, no, it can't be. Let us try and correct our system at all, yeah. One of the issues then is the enhancement of health and wellness of a police officer who lawfully carries and uses the gun as his tool of trade every day. I'm not going to get too much on this one because this one is a program on its own. You know that Minister has given me the responsibility of making sure that each and every police officer, out of that more than 200,000 police officers, are police officers who are in a good mind of state, so that they can be in a position of being able to carry firearms. In conclusion, I would like to conclude by saying, Chairperson, that delegates who are here must forge real partnerships to achieve the goals of efficiently controlling the acquiring, dealings and usage of guns in South Africa. I think one of the reasons why you have decided on this summit, it's not for our delegates to come and ask questions to us. It's for us to tell the delegates where the problem is so that they can assist us in trying and address some of those problems. I thank you very much.
Ma'am, are you taking some questions? You don't have to.
Never. Never.
Okay, I did promise to come to those Scarpies in the, no, who they are? Those folks who were acknowledged in the first round, but at least seen, but not necessarily acknowledged. So I'm going to go Martin, our new visitor today from the Professional Trainers Association. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, gentlemen, keep it short and sweet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Facilitator. I'll try. Honourable Minister, Deputy Minister, I want to start by thanking the member over there who suggested that we on this side, so to speak, take ownership of the problem. I think that's probably the most positive statement that's come out of the 2 days so far, and I can assure you that we do want to take ownership of the problem. But we need to identify what the problem is. We're focusing on the Firearms Control Act, its implementation, which we know are problematic. However, the problems in society with crime and violence in general are not only limited to the control and possession of firearms. We mustn't forget that. So I think that we need to consider in developing strategies, access to information. That's critical. Mr. Lamb from the University of Cape Town has suggested that more academic research needs to be done. The Secretariat has a mandate to do it. We, as those on the side of firearm ownership, also want to provide information, assistance and subject matter expertise as well to make sure that the research is done properly and to make sure it enables those strategies to be developed. In doing that, and this is my point, and I wanted to address this to the Honourable Minister, but I'm going to address it to the Honourable Deputy Minister, I find myself once again in agreement with Gun-Free South Africa. There is a smell around this report into the Central Firearms Registry that is only going to go away when it is made public. Make that report available, because the start of diagnosing the sickness will come from that report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to emphasize the importance of stakeholder participation. It's been brought up a couple of times today, and one of the issues that we have experienced in the industry is some of the unintended consequences that arise from a lack of stakeholder participation. Sometimes a decision will be made by Central Firearm Registrar that they are not aware of how that will negatively impact on industry because there hasn't been adequate stakeholder participation before, during and after the implementation of something new. And an example for that I can give is as follows. With regards to accredited sporting organizations and the issuing of dedicated status, when the process started, organizations were asked to provide their procedure that exists before they issue dedicated status. So a certain standard was shown. Then later an organization comes along, or organizations come along that don't meet the same standard, but they too are then given accreditation at a lower standard. Those now become the colleagues of the reputable sporting bodies, but they are at a lower level. The unintended consequences, when these guys are not at the same level as the rest of the industry, is Joe Public flocks to that organization because he can get his dedicated status faster and cheaper than the reputable organizations. And we don't have any platform to take this process back to CFR and to say to them, you are creating a problem or there's an unintended consequence to that which you are implementing. The stakeholder participation is something that we have to keep current all the time. It's not a once-off process. The other thing that concerns me with the Deputy Minister's mention of gun-free zones is just the process in terms of international information that we are getting coming back, very, very realistic. Gun-free zones tell the average person that knows nothing about firearms, it gives them the impression that this is some kind of safe place, safe haven, where the argument would be, why call it a gun-free zone? Because if you're saying that you need a place of safety from guns, then there's only two situations that can exist. Either there are a high level of accidents for people carrying firearms, which we're not aware of, or there's a high level of crime. Just like a firearm doesn't guarantee you safety, a gun-free zone doesn't guarantee that you are safe from crime. Why not call it a crime-free zone if that's what you're trying to achieve? Because a gun-friendly society cannot have gun-free zones without a place where the law-abiding person can hand in their firearm for safekeeping. You just create a gun-free zone like in a park, and now this person who works with a firearm cannot cross that area, pick up his children in that area. You make a criminal of that person. Be careful. Gun-free zones attract crime. The shootings in the United States have now made the decision in several states to put armed guards in gun-free zones because of the amount of crimes that are happening in there. The only people that carry firearms in gun-free zones are criminals. And to bring this forward as some kind of a safe haven is an absolute misrepresentation of the truth. We need to be careful to not try and put things in there to look like window dressing. Thank you.
Can you introduce yourself as well, please?
Sorry, Andre Pretorius from the Professional Firearm Trainers Council.
Thank you, Andre.
Honourable Deputy Minister, good day to you. Johan Skuman, Gun Owners, South Africa. I actually do have a question. I just want to give a little bit of background. I know you were not present in the House when the National Police Commissioner made her submission. And when the Honourable Minister made his presentation as well. A couple of things that came out of there. The Minister mentioned, for instance, a case of a single individual that had 436 firearms licensed to him. I think he mentioned this was 3 years ago. We don't know whether this individual was a collector or a sport shooter, but that's besides the point. And I think another person that he mentioned more recently that had 50 firearms, and he mentioned this as a concern. Out of Commissioner Piega's submission, we got the information of 8,605 firearm owners having been subjected to Section 102 inquiries and declared unfit to possess. A subsequent question gave us the data of 1,604 firearm license holders that had been declared unfit to possess by the courts under a Section 103 inquiry. So that gives me a total of 10,209, and I believe it was Advocate Orense that raised the 8,605 and said it's a significant number. However, if I take that 10,209 firearm owners and I weigh that up against the amount of licensed firearm owners in South Africa of 1,749,034 firearm owners, that means there was a problem experienced with 0.58% of firearm owners. 0.58, which is statistically insignificant. So my question, Deputy Honoured Minister, we are targeting the wrong segment here, and that has been our submission from the start. And I think from your submission, what came through very strongly is the challenges faced at CFR due to a lack of capacity, and you had a few very good suggestions there on how to improve the process and make their workload less so that they can focus on the important things. And I want to bring up what Mr. Kwape was mentioning earlier for Commissioner Piega's benefit, and I want to put the question to you as well. We are advocating a system of license the person and register the firearm, which means we don't have that duplication of efforts. Because as you rightly state currently, when a renewal for a license is applied for, there needs to be CRC record center checks, which takes a long time and it's a bottleneck. And we feel it's unnecessary because you duplicate. Once the competency has been renewed, we don't have to duplicate those efforts in order to issue the license as well. It's all been done. We just need to keep a register of the firearm and which person is in lawful possession. Thank you.
Can you put up your mic, please?
Thank you. It's Stephen Palos from representing the Hunters Forum, which is the 28-odd accredited hunting associations in South Africa. I'm particularly pleased to be able to put this to the Deputy Minister, and also particularly so in the presence of the Honourable Minister. The gentleman across the way there, the Honourable Member of the Portfolio Committee, asked a very pertinent question earlier on, just before the tea break, about all the conversations we're having. He observed that nobody is making a suggestion how to specifically close the taps on the illegal firearms, from the legal to the illegal. It's a little bit of a political thing, I think. And I'm going to give an example from another branch of government, how something changed tremendously, dramatically for the good just 2.5 years ago. From a hunting background, we also sat with huge challenges, just as we feel challenged now as firearm owners. Legitimate firearm owners across hunting, sport, shooting, self-defense, etc., constantly feel challenged in our security to continue to own those firearms. So it was with hunting for many years in this country. We felt politically challenged. About 2.5 years ago, the Honourable Edna Malewa held a special 2-day in Durban to unpack the issues. And she sat and she got a better understanding in that time of what exactly the various role players in hunting and the greater wildlife industry were and are, and what our problems were, and what our aspirations were, and what our transformation goals were, etc. At the end of that 2-day in Durban, she came out and did something that's never happened in South Africa before, the democratic South Africa or the previous South African regime. She made a positive statement that hunting is fundamentally good if it's properly regulated. It's here to stay, and government's role is to enable it. For the first time, the barriers broke down between us. For the first time, we engaged with her department on a national basis. That is now filtered down to the provincial departments in the most positive manner, that we have for the last 2 years been making incredible strides in regulating the practice of hunting better, in making people come into the loop to be compliant, to passing our information back up to government so that they can put in place mechanisms to protect or to prevent illegal activities. So suddenly, all of the resources we were wasting defending our position against our government are now being thrown to positives. It would be tremendously good if the Ministry of Police could declare that there isn't a political agenda to disarm law-abiding citizens of South Africa. Legitimate firearm ownership is protected. All the resources we're wasting trying to defend our position, we have tremendous working relationships on a practical basis with the CFR, solving problems. But we could then enter into a different kind of relationship. We could become part and parcel of government's 2030 strategy. So we want to work positively. Thank you.
Are you asking government to deal with your perceptions?
To take away our fear of threat.
Okay, so your perceptions then.
Thank you, Chair and Honourable Deputy Minister. My name is Ludwig Chair. For want of a better name, I've decided I'll call myself a representative for victims of crime in South Africa. And I would like to springboard onto what the Honourable Deputy Minister said regarding budgets and backlogs. And the concern is that we're now creating yet some more backlogs and budget constraints. It's not so much a question, or perhaps it is, and the Deputy Minister can decide whether she would like to answer or not. It's regarding microdotting and the fingerprinting ballistics. There are instances where there are crime committed in South Africa, somebody brandishing a firearm. We've had instances on live national television, etc. No shots are being fired. So the ballistic testing is a waste of time. The firearm is not in possession of the police. Assuming that the firearm is found, let's say the criminal left it behind as he ran away, then the microdotting and the ballistic testing will say, okay, that firearm belonged to that specific individual. I don't see that stopping the crime from happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and thank you very much to the delegates for their questions and also some comments. I think now I feel that why we have this summit today, because that's precisely what we need. We need, as I have said, that we need to be advised on how to deal with some of the challenges that we are faced with. But I must first do what I was told to do by one of the delegates, that yes, there is no political agenda to disarm law-abiding citizens from ourselves as this government. There is nothing like that. That one I commit. And I also then thank Dr. Wood there. I've been with you in some other platforms where we dealt with this legislation. I know how vocal we were in some instances, but I need to say that some of the issues that has been raised here by yourselves, it will assist us when we proceed with this piece of legislation's amendments. With the issue of the gun-free zones, I'm happy that I raised that, because these are some of the feelings from other people outside. Therefore, it needed to be debated so that at the end we all agree before we decide that we put this in a legislation. So I raised it purposely because these are some of the things that people that do come to us and then they raise these issues. Then I told myself I'm going to raise these issues in a platform like this one so that people should start then discussing that, so that at the end of the day we know exactly what is it that we need. You reminded me when you spoke about these gun-free zones, they attract crime. In a constituency where I come from, Minister, they were busy then doing, what do they call it, this research now, where they wanted to build a mall, you know. And at the end, then they had to consult with the community. And then myself as a member of parliament, I was supposed to be part of that consultation. And then we told the community that here we are going to build your pick and pays, your net banks, your APSAs, your what. And then one of the community members said that, hi, corner MP, hi, corner. We are peaceful here where we are. Now you want to attract all the sources to come at this area of us. You are talking about building your APSAs here and your net banks and your what, and then we hear about ATM bombs, but we don't have such things here. Now you want to bring those things here, because his was only about the crime, but ours was about bringing the service to the people. Therefore, I understand what you are saying. These things need to be debated. But thank you very much, Program Director. I've taken everything that has been said here. The discussions will still go further. The Portfolio Committee, I will always be part of the Portfolio Committee, so that we should come up with some sort of an engagement where we'll engage yourselves as experts, so that I know that it's not all crime that are being committed by firearms. There is a lot of crime that is being committed in both licensed and unlicensed firearms. I don't want to respond, because I don't know what was the response of National Commissioner on the issue of licensing an individual versus licensing a firearm. I think it also needs to be debated before we can take a decision on that one. We need to debate, because there was a reason why we took a decision in 2000 that we needed to license a firearm. So if we want to change, let us then debate that among ourselves, so that we should come up with something that all of us then agreed upon. Thank you very much then.
That's fine. Yeah. We're going to release the Deputy Minister. The Minister is still with us, and the Deputy Minister will be for a while still. In honor of our program, we've asked Mr. Choke to sum up his contribution, and his contribution is very targeted, because we've had a lot of focus on how guns in state hands and those of individuals are to be regulated, enabled and controlled. What about big institutions where the perception is, as he and I spoke, that there are more guns in the private security sector, or at least different kinds of guns in the private security sector? And how then do we regulate those? So, sir, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me take this opportunity to greet the Minister, the Deputy Minister, the Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, members of the Portfolio Committee, senior members of SAPS, everyone that's here, the delegates, all protocols observed, as we say. I'm just going to take you through an overview. As the Program Director said, my presentation is going to be short. I'll take you through the overview of the industry, what you have in terms of the numbers of companies that has firearms, a little bit of an audit that we did to try to account for the firearms in the industry, the existing framework in terms of legislation, as well as the limitations we have in terms of the regulation of firearms within the industry, as well as what we think are the current proposed legislation, as well as the bill, and of course our recommendations thereafter. Okay, in terms of the thank you very much. In terms of the numbers within the industry, I think just to give you a perspective, we have about 8,365. And these are the numbers that we used at the time we did the audit, which was 2012-2013 to 2013-2014. 8,365 companies that were active, and at the same time we had 462,000 security officers on the ground. And just to give you a general feel of the type of companies that utilize firearms within the industry, your general guarding sector, assets in transit, reaction services, close protection, as well as your anti-poaching sector. But there's a lot more categories in terms of that, so that's just a snapshot of them. Also, in terms of the type of firearms that are used, and I'm quite aware that there's a number of firearms, different firearms that are used, but the most common ones are the handguns, the shotguns, the restricted firearms, semi-automatics, as well as the bolt-action rifles. Those are used by the anti-poaching sector. In terms of the audit that we did, just to give a little bit of a background to the audit, there was quite an outcry that we're regulating the industry, but we're unable to account as to the firearms in the industry. And quite correctly, we work together very closely with SAPS, more specifically the CFR, and for us to be able to account on those firearms, we will of course have to get the data from them. And that has been a little bit of a challenge in the past, due to the fact that we're still building a relationship. But however, eventually we did get a database from them, which together we worked and cleaned the database, and we came up with some numbers, just to also, most importantly, identify the number of companies with firearms that are licensed, as well as the number of guards that they employ, and of course to verify what is their status insofar as our registration database, as well as what is their status with the CIPC, which is the Companies Intellectual Properties Commission, the then CIPRO. So what then we did in terms of the numbers after the audit, from the numbers that I gave you, we then looked at the total number of security businesses that have got firearms. We came up to 3,340. In terms of the total number of firearms within the industry at the time, that after we did our audit, and of course to qualify the audit again, this is a desk audit that we did between the database that was sitting with CFR and that was sitting with us. We came to 101,000 firearms that were in the industry. Of course, in terms of those numbers, you realize that the biggest number of firearms is sitting with Gauteng, followed by Limpopo, then at the time, followed by KZN, and of course the Western Cape. So those were the numbers in terms of the firearms, and then we'll talk some more, I think. In terms of the results now, this is now looking at SIRA. What is the status of these companies that we have within SIRA database? Now, assuming all of these are companies that were licensed at the time. So these numbers, again, should have changed by now. At the time, we were sitting with 50% of those companies with the status that says they are registered, and then we're sitting with 29% that said these are withdrawn, meaning that these are the companies which we've withdrawn the licenses. We're sitting with 7% at the time that was saying the registration is suspended. In other words, we have taken steps to suspend the registration of those. 4% of those were in-house, meaning that the in-house, we're talking about government departments that were such as your Transnet that all have its own security. 4% again was suspensions intended at the time. And of course, 3% of them we couldn't account on our database. In other words, when we looked in our database, these were neither registered nor could be found. And 1% of those were voluntarily closed. There was facing voluntary closure. And of course, 2% had applied for voluntary suspension. So I think this is the numbers that would have worried us very much at the time. As I said, that they've changed by now. Of course, the concern would have been what then happens to the companies whose registration were withdrawn. We have communicated these numbers to SAPS, and I know that we've done quite a lot of work between us and the CFR in terms of dealing and identifying these companies. In terms of the slide that follows, we looked at the same companies within the ambit of the CIPC. What is the registration status of those? Of course, again, these registration statuses would have changed at the time, you know, it varies. And I'm told that when a company is facing deregistration with CICPX, it can still be reinstated. At the time, we found that the active ones was about 1,908, of course, followed by those that were in the deregistration phase, those that were liquidated. I think of most concern are those that were liquidated and those that were dissolved. And of course, we had also another number of those that we couldn't tell in terms of that audit, what is their status actually. So again, it represents the kind of numbers. So effectively, in terms of the companies that were active, we had about 1,908 that were in good standing with the CPI at the time. In terms of the existing legislation, of course, as I said in the beginning, we work very closely with the CFR in terms of regulating the industry. What we do is we do inspections at times jointly with them to try to identify the number of firearms that companies still have. You know, we work from their data, of course. The security office is employed, and they do a lot of inquiries as well. Just to put a perspective to it, whenever the company applies for a license, we would be approached by the CFR to say, can you verify whether this company, first of all, exists, the number of people that they claim to have, they're applying for so many firearms, what is their registration status, and so on. So we'd look at those. And in terms of also the numbers, just to give you what happened last year in the 2013-2014, in terms of we received about 1,119 applications or inquiries from CFR. Of those, we cleared about 749, 370 of those were declined. In other words, we didn't support at the time the applications for firearms, and that was for various reasons, such as supplying information that is incorrect or that is false, not being in good standing with various authorities, your SARS, your CIRAS, as well as other statutory bodies. Of course, in terms of the limitations that we have within the industry, we're facing various limitations in terms of regulation. First of all, the challenge is the access to the database of CFR. We're working on that. In fact, you will notice that in the CIRA Amendment Bill that was passed by Parliament, there is a specific provision that deals with that seeks to enhance that. But we still have a challenge with that because that says to us that we need to be writing a letter to the CFR each time we require information. And I cannot see how practical that is going to be. But the kind of other limitations that we have is, of course, the differentiation of the database. We actually want to link in and integrate the databases electronically. We don't want to amend the information that we're sitting with CFR. We just want to view so that when we inspect, we know, we go out to a company, we're aware that this company has firearms, this is the type of firearms, this is the number of firearms. Of course, there was also at one stage a breakdown of a communication between us and the CFR insofar as after the licenses have been granted and the registration status changes and so on, we should be able to, from time to time, in real time, know what the status of that company is. If the firearms, for instance, have been lost and reported through the CFR, we should be able to tell that these firearms are no longer with the company and so on. And we are aware that also the status with the CIPC, we should be able to also look at that. In terms of the inspections of the competency certificate, which is most of what we do when we do the inspections, we should be able to tell real time as well when we do these inspections what is the status of those. Okay, so I think that is in short the limitations. From a regulatory point of view, the current proposals where we're sitting, the amendment bill, as I said, it proposes that some of the activities that will be regulated going into the future, which we have actually started doing in an informal base. The reporting of the number of firearms that are lost by the industry, that are stolen, that are destroyed, in terms of so that we bring that. And also there is a requirement that we should be reporting these kind of things through the portfolio committee as well in our annual report. If you get to the next slide as well, there's also the empowerment of the minister to make certain regulations regarding firearms, in particular the issuing, possession and the use of firearms and other weapons by security service providers. I think this is one of the most important kind of proposals in the bill. The reason for that is that there is an outcry now about the firearms that are being possessed by security service providers. Just to give an example, when we talk the taxi violence in KZN, the outcries that these people are wielding very big firearms and they are intimidating us. So we should be able to take care of that, because we don't see the reason why people should be possessing very huge firearms in areas which there is no need for them. Going forward, of course, again, as I said, that we should be working together from a CIRA point of view. We're looking forward to. Okay, I think we've moved ahead there. In terms of the other proposals in the Amendment Act, of course, which complements the current amendment of the Firearms Control Act, is the fact that we should be reporting on various transactions that take place, your suspensions, your sales, your transfer, and so on. Of course, also augmented by the current amendments, the fact that there should be some ballistic testing of those. And of course, also the section that I referred to that requires us to, from time to time, within 30 days, write a letter to the CFR requesting them the information. This is where our concern is, because this information should be available real time to us so that we're able to work around the issues of firearms. It is important that we get it in time. If we also look, as I've already talked about, the requirement that we should be reporting to Parliament, and I think the next coming two slides in particular it highlights some of the changes, as I said, that we've already talked about in many ways since the beginning of this seminar. I think what's important to us is to say that we should be part of those programs. If there's going to be any ballistic testing of those firearms, CIRA should be part of that program. The reason for this, we should be able to know how many, again, of these firearms are still with the provider, how many have been sent, and vice versa, that information. So I think also with the issue of the next, I think we can just move because what I've said covers the next, two slides. I think importantly, the reason, what is it that we should be doing to ensure that we enhance regulation? Of course, as I said, we should be participating, we should be integrating, and of course, by way of recommendations, that we are putting across in terms of how these firearms should be regulated. First of all is the issue of the database. I think that has been said. It's quite important that we have access to the database. We should be developing also some of the accesses that CFR would require from us so that there is no need for them to all send the letters to us all the time. We should be having greater collaboration between ourselves, and we should be creating, of course, the functional inspectorate team within CIRA to ensure that we're able to deal with the issues of firearms. Of course, the training of our inspectors. Earlier on, I forgot to mention that, currently our inspectors do not have competencies to handle firearms. What we do is we do most of our inspections in conjunction with the, the DFOs in the various areas. So we plan to also train them. Our capacity is still very much limited in terms of law enforcement, so that's the reason why we're still lacking in that area. I think that should be concluding the presentation. And thank you very much. I'm in the company of my two colleagues, Dr. Sabelo Gumeze, the head of our research, as well as Advocate Ntetwa, so they should join me for questions if there's any. Thank you very much.
If you want to ask a question, please put up your hand. I will ignore you if you've spoken plenty times before.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Executive CEO, for the presentation. Maybe just a question, and maybe also Steve Conradi of the Security Alliance industry can maybe just respond. We spoke this morning, and I think it's a big question over these 2 days, the illegal pool, the filtering from the legal pool to the illegal pool. Maybe what is the stats, what is the projections, is there any database to determine what is the flow from the private security industry to the illegal pool? And I mean in terms of disciplinary steps by companies, can we maybe just get a picture? And what would be maybe steps from your side or proposals to ensure that there's better control in terms of that environment? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chauke, for the presentation. Mine is just a recommendation that due to the challenges that have been raised in the presentation by CIRA, that I would recommend that on a monthly basis between CIRA and CFR, from now onwards, let's meet so that if there are any challenges, we address them immediately. So I'll recommend the two parties that we meet on a regular basis, preferably on a monthly basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Mine is maybe even the leadership of SAPS can help. It's still on the DFOs, because Sarah also touched on DFOs. Seeing that these DFOs have got 3 tasks to do, the licensing, I mean this one of processing applications, the second-hand goods, the liquor licensing, are they not being overburdened? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. My concern is the security companies. Licenses are being given to these security companies. They intend giving them out to their security officials. Now, we have got a vetting system. You've got a process where people need to be competent to be able to have these firearm licenses. I'm not sure, given the fact that with your statistics, almost half these companies seem to be closing down. It seems like we need a department on its own just to monitor their existence. Whether we have the capacity to be able to monitor them and things, because it sounds like it's a very laborious task. Number one, with the number of companies closing, and secondly, whether those staff of theirs that are being issued with these firearms are really competent enough to be able to have these firearms in their possession or to be able to utilize them.
My question is related to the gun shop owners and the regulatory. I just want to ask the honourable member, like in a case of mine, it's been 7 years now, and the gun shop owner has said this existing regulatory framework is not with them. So when will this be in place and when will it be implemented? Because now at this stage I cannot go fetch my firearm because of this regulatory framework, and it's now stopping me. You know, I've given them the money, I've applied for the firearm, it's there, but it's stopping me from fetching it because of this regulatory framework. I just want to know, when will it be implemented? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. I think in terms of the first question by the chairperson, I'll also hear if there is any data from the members of our industry, in particular Sia and Mr. Wood, if you have, but I'm not aware of the data in regard to the pool of illegal firearms into the industry, Chair. However, there is quite a lot that we're doing together with CFR. In fact, we haven't shown you our compliance stats. We will share them later. We also share them through the annual reports as well. The kind of operations that we do with CFR, in particular the flash unit. So there's quite a lot that we do in the industry, from the arrest to the seizures and so on. There is very strict compliance when it comes to issues of competency, issues of record keeping, your permits and so on, your safes, whether the firearms are stored properly, whether the firearms are also in possession of people who are competent to possess those firearms. In terms of the challenges, the general, we thank you very much for that. We are actually aware that there is some interaction that's taking place, but perhaps not at the higher level at the moment. I think the breakdown of the communication at the higher level was when the two other brigadiers were suspended previously. We had a very good relationship at the time, so we need to re-establish that and work together going forward. In terms of the firearms that have been abandoned, I think the gentleman asked about, it seems as if a lot of those companies are closing down and what happens. I think they're not necessarily closing down. As we said, these numbers change from time to time. Of course, those that we should be concerned about are those that have closed down, of course, that are no longer in business, those that have been dissolved. Those are the ones that should concern us. And from what I know, that we do such inspections with CFR to try to determine where these people are, where the firearms are, where are the responsible persons that were, reported to be people who are responsible for those firearms. And we also, I must mention that from the capacity point of view, there is of course challenges. As you know, our inspectorate is not that big. So that is the reason why every time we do inspections, we then request CFR to give us the information. We're going to be doing this number of inspections, tell us of these companies who's been issued with licenses. So we sort of do it on that kind of basis. Others is the information that we receive, from our hotlines in terms of non-compliance with firearms. That's how we do those inspections. But from a capacity point of view, we still challenge a little bit. And I think that's I'm not sure if there's anything that I've left out. You're welcome to add to what I've said, Steve. I think the last question, I'm not sure, because what we were saying there is that there's there's a current framework, which I don't think it does. Are you referring to your application in respect of a security company? Or is it a personal?
It's a personal application.
Okay. So that I will leave to SAPS, that the framework in regard to our applications you then have to lodge as a security company an application with SAPS. They then come back to us and say, are they compliant before we assist? So SAPS will be able to deal with that. Thank you.
Program Director, Deputy Minister, Honorable Beekman. Mr. Chowki, yes, what I want to add to specifically what he said is we don't have a number of firearms. The biggest concern that the industry has got is particularly non-compliant companies, and hence the Security Industry Alliance working close with the regulator in order to assist in getting the industry cleaned up. I think this is the biggest challenge for the industry. That's the biggest issue that tarnish our image. The other point that I want to add, particular to the statistics that Mr. Chowki has presented here, you see the number of deregistered companies or companies disappearing from the radar. That is an opportunity where the Firearms Registry needs to, in fact, take away those licenses, act immediately, and there should be a closer link between the SIPSI results, CIRA, as well as the CFR. That can assist us basically to take those firearms out the system because they're not required anymore.
Mr. Facilitator, if I can also address the question posed by the Honourable Beekman. We don't have statistics, which I think is apparent. The Security Industry Alliance represents the organised industry, and it's been a success story in terms of our cooperation with the regulator. There has been an ongoing relationship for some time. That has not, in parts, been supported by the police, and it needs to be supported by the police. And as I indicated earlier, that one of the problems is that we're not even reflected on the documentation as a stakeholder in the firearm debate. The issuing of company firearms to individuals is strictly regulated in terms of the Act. In fact, it's the most serious offence in the Act to hand a firearm to a person who does not have a competency. So there are two issues that need to be fundamentally addressed to better regulate security service providers. One is to capacitate CIRA, and I think Mr. Chowki, when he says we are slightly challenged, is saying that's perhaps tongue-in-cheek because this bill, the Security Amendment Bill, requires substantial allocation of resources. So we need to capacitate the regulator. But what we mustn't forget, and what we haven't spoken about, and this is a general principle not limited to the security industry, is the issue of enforcement. If you look at the Act, the security industry is regulated through Section 20 and Regulation 21. There's a recipe there of requirements. It's not for anyone but SAPS to make sure that those requirements of the Act are enforced. And we're talking about two different pieces of legislation. You're talking about private security industry regulatory legislation on the one hand, but firearms are controlled through the Firearms Control Act. That is a SAPS responsibility, and enforcement is the responsibility of SAPS. And that is where we need to look. We haven't spoken about the enforcement at this stage, and it's something that needs to be addressed as well.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. On the issue of DFOs doing different taskings in terms of firearm licenses, second-hand goods, and liquor licenses, within South African Police Service, we have the designated police officers. Maybe let me start by saying that depending on the capacity of each police station, at small stations, we mostly use the designated police officers who will then be multitasked to do the work of the firearm licensing, the liquor licensing, and also the second-hand goods. But at your bigger stations where we have enough capacity, then you'll have the designated liquor officer, you'll have a designated firearm officer, and then you'll also have a designated police officer who will then deal with second-hand goods-related issues, liquor-related issues, and firearm-related issues. So, but one of our inputs that we'll be making as part of the firearm amendment bill will be also to see how best do we look at the issue, to say the challenges that we are having, especially at small stations. See how best, how the Act can empower us that we have this capacity at all the environments. Because sometimes, yes, it's a fact that we find a situation whereby if one designated police officer is not available, then there might be a challenge. But the way we mitigate that is by ensuring that the provinces always ensure that they know if there is a member that's going to go on leave or is going to be absent, so that we can then second somebody to go into the job until the other member is back. Thank you, Chair.
I just want to take a quick straw poll to see if anybody still has questions for this lot. Chair Kenny's team. Then I can release them. We still have the Deputy Minister here. We still have a very, very strong SAPS component. You may be still sitting with questions to ask them or suggestions you want to make before or after lunch, where we'll try to summarize the 2 days and start collating things and, grouping them and start looking for things to take forward. So let's spend the next 20 minutes engaging each other not only as stakeholders, but also as, sharing a common concern to get ahead of these challenges around firearms control and regulation and creating the kind of society that we all desire. Shall we say thank you to the three of you? You'll still be in the audience, so thank you very much. To them. Okay, Guy has a question to you.
Sorry to prevent your release. It's a question around domestic violence, and there's studies that have been done looking at who are the most vulnerable men or high-risk men in terms of perpetrating domestic violence. And a study done by Medical Research Council suggested or indicated in their representative study that it was men from the security industry, but it included police as well, so it was kind of a fairly broad category. So the question I have for you, and within the kind of audits, has there ever been any thinking about, and this is in the context of licensing the person, around the behavior of individuals within the security industry and what measures are taken against those who are implicated in domestic violence or guilty of domestic violence? Because we know there's a process in place around going to a police station and having the weapon confiscated, but that's a much more extreme version. But it's around, I think the industry could play quite an important role in preventing various forms of violence, because some of the members in the industry have access to firearms. So it's just kind of a question if there's been any thinking about this and regulation in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. I think the question touches on 2 or 3 areas. One is the issue of the fit and proper person and whether a person is fit and proper to possess a firearm and what happens after. Currently, our legislation does cover for that. First, we have a code of conduct that deals with all sorts of obligations that the security service provider, and when we say a security service provider, we refer to both the company as well as the security officer. So they've got obligations. One of those is also issues to respect the dignity and physical dignity of people, to respect the Constitution, the rights, and so on. So we do prosecutions where we prosecute security officers for violations of the code of conduct and where they've assaulted people domestically and so on. And I'm quite aware of the reports where security officers have been in violation of the Firearms Control Act and the steps that we're taking to try to either suspend them or either withdraw their registration. So there's also an obligation on the employer to do so. So I think those are sufficiently covered. Thank you very much.
If I may, I'd like to answer Mr. Lamb's question. I had a professor of law many, many years ago who always said, read the law. The solution to that question is contained in Regulation 21. Security officers are the most strictly regulated person who's allowed to carry a firearm, more so than SAPs at this stage, for example, although that may be addressed in the Amendment Act. There's a shopping list, a very comprehensive shopping list of requirements that a security officer has to comply with, one of which, for example, is effectively a daily assessment by the employer before that person is allowed to take a firearm on duty. So there are mechanisms that exist already to ensure that a security officer who's given access to a firearm is fit and proper to do so. The question, once again, simply comes down to proper policing of it.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is more a comment than a question. Maybe it might not be the mandate of this workshop, but related to the Firearm Control Act is the pending or the bill that is not signed as yet into act on for the private security, which we are of the view that it should be finalized and put into law as a matter of urgency. I know the private security companies have threatened to litigate it, and so let it be, but it must be processed. It is an industry, obviously, which we view as an industry which, at times, law unto itself, where allegations of illegal weapons are in that industry. So, in fact, we recommend that the police ministry, well, it's not at that level anymore, I think, because it's now a bill. It must be processed and be finalized. Thank you.
Okay, I'm a little reluctant to open that can of worms, so I'm going to let it rest right there, because we're not discussing that piece of legislation per se. What it does point to, though, and this is something that has been in the room for a while, is that perceptions are often more powerful than any data sets we have. Let's just acknowledge that. And there's perceptions around the private security industry, there's perceptions around gun owners and who has guns and who doesn't. There's perceptions around the role of poor people and the conditions in which they live, and whether that is criminogenic, and whether that in fact gives rise to crime and the fear of therefore having to own a gun. And yet we can substantiate very little of this. Our cry for data and need for quality data and a proper and thorough analysis based on evidence seems to be missing. And one of the perceptual elephants in the room was what the Deputy Minister poo-pooed a little while ago, was to say, hold on, nobody's after your guns. What we do have to do as a responsible government is seek to say, are we regulating this environment in a way that is fair and just and also appropriate for the times and for who seeks to own a gun? That's what responsible governments do. So we hope that we take our energies and we in fact do say what can we all do to not only stop leakages, but also regulate, self-regulate if need be, ourselves, and be responsible as to who gets access to a firearm, how and where they store that firearm, how do they demonstrate competency, how long is the period of validity of that particular firearm, and should they misuse that firearm and for whatever reason, that for somehow we seek to intervene in a way that shares our common interests. Because we are the only custodians of the rights we have. They're not guaranteed. They can always be limited. We are the custodians, and the one way to continue to be custodians is to be responsible and to accept that responsibility. And I think we've demonstrated in this room a collective will to take responsibility. So if lunch is ready and there is no robust conversation, then I'm going to release you to go to lunch, and that at 1:15 or 20, what, is it 1:30? That we come back at 1:30 and let's start summing up and looking at the way forward. Is that okay? Thank you once again, and thank you to Mr. Chioke and his team.